What if the greatest failure of your life didn't disqualify you? What if the moment you are most ashamed of is actually the moment God begins rebuilding you? One night, a man swore he would never abandon Jesus. Just a few hours later, he denied even knowing him. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And when the rooster crowed, Peter's world shattered. This is the story of the disciple who thought his failure was the end, but discovered it was only the beginning. There are failures that happen in public. And then there are failures that happen inside the soul long before anyone else can see them. The dangerous failures are not always the ones that begin with bad intentions. Sometimes they begin with confidence. Too much confidence. The kind of confidence that whispers, "That could never be me. I would never do that. I am stronger than that." History is filled with people who fell because they underestimated their own weakness. And perhaps no story in Scripture reveals this truth more painfully than the story of Peter. Because Peter did not begin as a coward. He began as the disciple who loved Jesus more passionately than almost anyone else. The disciple who left everything behind. The disciple who stepped out of a boat onto stormy water. The disciple who was always first to speak, first to act, first to promise, first to fight. And yet, he would eventually become the disciple who denied even knowing Jesus.
This audio is synthesized using AI technology from VB.VN.
Not once, not twice, 3 times. How does something like that happen? How does a man go from extraordinary devotion to devastating failure in a single night? The answer begins long before the rooster crowed. Long before the courtyard. Long before the trial. Long before the fear. It begins in Jerusalem. The city was unlike anything Peter had ever seen. Thousands upon thousands of pilgrims crowded the streets. People from distant regions arrived for Passover. The roads overflowed with travelers. Merchants shouted. Animals filled the marketplaces. Roman soldiers watched from every corner. Religious leaders moved through the crowds. The city felt alive. Yet beneath the celebration, something darker was building. Something invisible. Something inevitable. Because while most people were preparing for a feast, God was preparing for a sacrifice. And only Jesus fully understood what was about to happen. Peter did not. None of the disciples did. They had spent years following Jesus. Years watching miracles. Years listening to teachings. Years witnessing impossible things. The blind received sight. The lame walked. Storms obeyed his voice. Demons fled. Crowds gathered wherever he went. And with every miracle, one belief grew stronger inside the disciples. Jesus would become king. Not merely a teacher. Not merely a prophet. A king. The Messiah. The one who would change everything. Peter especially believed this.
This audio is synthesized using AI technology from VB.VN.
Because Peter was not the kind of man who followed halfway. Everything about him was intense. When he loved completely. When he believed passionately. When he committed with his entire heart. That passion made him remarkable. But it also made him vulnerable. Because passionate people often mistake sincerity for strength. They believe good intentions alone are enough. Peter genuinely loved Jesus. Nobody can question that. But love alone does not eliminate human weakness. And Peter was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way imaginable. As Jesus and the disciples entered Jerusalem, the atmosphere felt electric. Crowds welcomed him. People spread garments on the road. Palm branches filled the air. Voices shouted praise. Many believed this was the beginning. The beginning of victory. The beginning of freedom. The beginning of a new kingdom. The disciples must have felt excitement growing. Perhaps they imagined positions of honor. Perhaps they imagined a future unlike anything they had known. Perhaps Peter imagined standing beside Jesus as the kingdom expanded. Everything appeared to be moving toward triumph. But Jesus saw something they could not. He saw the cross. He saw betrayal. He saw suffering. He saw abandonment. He saw the darkness waiting ahead. And perhaps that is one of the loneliest realities of leadership.
Experience AI voice technology at vb.vn.
Sometimes you can see a storm approaching while everyone around you is celebrating sunshine. Jesus knew. Peter did not. And that difference would soon matter greatly. The days passed quickly. Jesus taught openly in the temple. Crowds listened. Religious leaders grew increasingly hostile. Tension spread through the city. Every conversation felt heavier. Every encounter felt more dangerous. The opposition was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet Peter remained confident. Very confident. Perhaps too confident. Because confidence can become dangerous when it is built on assumptions rather than humility. Peter had seen himself stand courageously beside Jesus countless times. He had defended him before. He had followed him through difficult situations before. Why would the future be any different? Why would he ever abandon the one he loved? The question seemed ridiculous. Impossible. Unthinkable. Peter could imagine many things. But he could not imagine failing Jesus. That blind spot would become his greatest weakness. Because the sins we fear are rarely the ones that surprise us. The failures that devastate us are often the ones we never believed possible. And Peter never believed this failure was possible. As the week progressed, Jerusalem became increasingly tense. Whispers spread through the city. Rumors circulated.
Experience AI voice technology at vb.vn.
The religious leaders were searching for an opportunity. A moment. A mistake. Anything they could use against Jesus. Darkness was moving closer. Yet most people could not see it. Not yet. The disciples certainly could not. They still expected victory. Still expected triumph. Still expected Jesus to reveal his power in a dramatic way. Still expected the story to end differently. But God was writing a story nobody expected. A story that would pass through suffering before glory. A story that would pass through failure before restoration. A story that would pass through death before resurrection. And Peter was about to discover that his greatest test would not come from enemies. It would come from himself. Because there is a version of ourselves we believe we are. And then there is the version revealed under pressure. Most of us never truly know which one is real until the pressure arrives. Peter's pressure was coming. The city continued buzzing around him. The crowds continued moving. The celebrations continued. The lights of Jerusalem glowed beneath the evening sky. Everything looked normal. Everything looked hopeful. Everything looked safe. But hidden beneath the surface. The clock was ticking.
Voice generated by vb.vn.
A betrayal was already taking shape. A trial was approaching. A cross was waiting. And before the sun rose again, Peter would discover something about himself he never wanted to know. A discovery so painful, it would leave him weeping in the darkness. But that night had not arrived yet. For now, Peter still believed he was strong. For now, Peter still believed he would never leave Jesus. For now, Peter still believed failure belonged to someone else. And that belief was the first step toward the longest night of his life.